Hello, viewers. Today we're going to cover something that I think is actually very important. If you live in a Western country, as I know most of you do, your government and mine are aiding and abetting Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. Today we're going to hear some testimony from healthcare workers that operated in Gaza of what this support has resulted in, of what we have done.
Oh, funky frog bait. Ah, yes. Yes.
Dear President Biden and Vice President Harris, we are 99 American physicians, surgeons, nurse practitioners, nurses, and midwives.
Sorry. Wait, what? I can't tell what the affiliation of this account is. Out there, everyone knows you went too far, and now we Jews are screwed all the time everywhere we go in America. It just takes one talk with people. What? Huh? Can you speak English? I don't know what this means. Can you speak English? Do, who is you in this context? You as in Americans, or like you as in streamers, or you as in me specifically? Me, or like the state, or like Arabs, or like who? Who is you here? Twitch chat? Is Twitch chat the one? Did Twitch chat, have you guys been doing anti-Semitism? Yeah, you're screwed up and hiding Jewish people getting attacked in ever friggin' state. Huh? It just take one talk with people. Um, Sorry, my bad. I'll make sure not to do that next time. Sorry. I've changed. I swear. I will do my just one talk with people, okay? For you. Make sure you guys go do your one talk with people, okay? All right, continuing.
Who have volunteered in the Gaza Strip since October 7th, 2023. Combined, we spent 254 weeks volunteering in Gaza's hospitals and clinics. We worked with various non-governmental organizations and the World Health Organization in hospitals and clinics throughout the Strip. In addition to our medical and surgical expertise, many of us have a public health background, as well as experience working in humanitarian and conflict zones, including Ukraine during the brutal Russian invasion. Some of us are veterans and reservists. We are a multi-faith and multi-ethnic group. None of us support the horrors committed on October 7th by Palestinian armed groups and individuals in Israel. The Constitution of the World Health Organization states, "The health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security and is dependent on the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. It is in this spirit that we write to you in this open letter. We are among the only neutral observers who have been permitted to enter the Gaza Strip since October 7th. Given our broad expertise and direct experience of working throughout Gaza, we are uniquely positioned to comment on several matters of importance to our government as it decides whether to continue supporting Israel's attack on and siege of the Gaza Strip. Specifically, we believe we are well positioned to comment on the massive human toll from Israel's attack on Gaza, especially the toll it has taken on women and children. This letter collects and summarizes our own experiences and direct observations in Gaza. The letter is accompanied by a detailed appendix summarizing the publicly available information from media, humanitarian, and academic sources on key aspects of Israel's invasion of Gaza. Both this letter and the appendix are available electronically at gazahealthcareletters.org. This website also houses letters from Canadian and British healthcare workers to their respective governments, making many similar observations to those herein. This letter and the appendix show probative evidence that the human toll in Gaza since October is far higher than is understood in the United States. It is likely that the death toll from this conflict is already greater than 118,908, an astounding 5.4% of Gaza's population. Our government must act immediately.
Which, like, I think anyone with 2 brain cells knows that the death toll in Gaza, there's no way it's frozen at 40,000. There's just no way. I believe that it's greater than 100,000 people. And I'm sure, give it a year or another or 2 years or something like that, and we'll have the UN go in and do their own reports and show that it's greater than 100,000 people. And that's like the number of people that have died from medical issues caused by the shelling or the actual shelling itself. This doesn't even account, probably it's probably even higher than that if you account for all of the people who have died of starvation or a lack of nutrition, or dehydration, or preventable, treatable, curable diseases that we cannot help with because there are no medical supplies going into Gaza. So anyone with like asthma, for example, who because of all the rubble, they literally can't breathe. And there's no, like, where are they going to get the medical supplies to help them? Right? Bassan's grandmother died from a lack of treatment available in the north of Gaza. Yeah. I think I also want to watch today. I know a lot of this stuff, or some of this stuff I know we've watched before, but I think it's important to watch. I really want to go back and watch Anthony Bourdain's trip to Gaza because I think it really like humanizes the people there. I mean, you guys don't need help humanizing them, but I think that one also is worthwhile. This number also probably doesn't even account for one other major subset that I'm failing to remember off the top of my head right now. If I recall it, I'll let you guys know. But there are so many problems and there are so many people. Oh, missing persons. The number of people that are trapped under rubble, and there just aren't enough people going and getting the people from under the rubble because Israel keeps killing those people. So, yeah, that doesn't even count. And also doesn't account for unregistered babies or, babies that were conceived, born, and there are babies that were conceived, born, and killed in this genocide that potentially were never registered because there are no actual operating hospitals. And all of them have been bombed. And this would not count towards the death count, but it is worth noting the amount of miscarriages that have occurred in Gaza. Because surprise, surprise, stress causes more miscarriages. The number of women that were at some point trying to conceive prior to October 7th, who there's no prenatal care to obtain anywhere, right? And I mean, anyone here who's spoken to people who have tried for kids, I wouldn't know what it's like. I am not interested personally in having kids, but I've spoken to a lot of people who either have had kids or want to have kids, and they talk about miscarriages as very, very stressful. Like, it is, especially if you're the further you are into the pregnancy, the more of a toll the miscarriage takes on you. And anyone here who's spoken to people who have experienced miscarriages, when they are actively trying to have a child, it's been described to me as one of the like most mentally agonizing things that you can go through. To go through that while you're in the middle of a genocide and there's nothing you can do. Yeah. So.
8, an astounding 5.4% of Gaza's population. Our government must act immediately to prevent an even worse catastrophe than what has already befallen the people of Gaza and Israel. A ceasefire must be imposed on the warring parties by withholding military support for Israel and supporting an international arms embargo on Israel and all Palestinian armed groups. We believe our government is obligated to do this both under American law and international humanitarian law. We also believe it is the right thing to do. I've never seen such horrific injuries on such a massive scale with so few resources. Our bombs are cutting down women and children by the thousands. Their mutilated bodies are a monument to cruelty. Dr. Feroz Sidwa, trauma and critical care surgeon, Veterans Affairs general surgeon. With only marginal exceptions, everyone in Gaza is sick, injured, or both. This includes every national aid worker, every international volunteer, and probably every Israeli hostage, every man, woman, and child. While working in Gaza, we saw widespread malnutrition in our patients and our Palestinian healthcare colleagues. Every one of us lost weight rapidly in Gaza despite having privileged access to food and having taken our own supplementary nutrient-dense foods with us. We have photographic evidence of life-threatening malnutrition in our patients, especially children, that we are eager to share with you. Virtually every child under the age of 5 whom we encountered, both inside and outside of the hospital, had both a cough and watery diarrhea. We found cases of jaundice, indicating hepatitis A infection under such conditions, in nearly every room of the hospitals in which we served, and in many of our healthcare colleagues in Gaza. An astonishingly high percentage of our surgical incisions became infected from the combination of malnutrition, impossible operating conditions, lack of basic sanitation supplies such as soap, and lack of surgical supplies and medications, including antibiotics. Malnutrition led to widespread spontaneous abortions, underweight newborns, and an inability of new mothers to breastfeed. This left their newborns at high risk of death given the lack of access to potable water anywhere in Gaza. Many of those infants died. In Gaza, we watched malnourished mothers feed their underweight newborns infant formula made with poisonous water. We can never forget that the world abandoned these innocent women and babies. Every day I saw babies die. They had been born healthy, their mothers were so malnourished that they could not breastfeed, and we lacked formula or clean water to feed them, so they starved. Asma Taha, pediatric nurse practitioner. We urge you to realize that epidemics are raging in Gaza. Israel's continued repeated displacement of the malnourished and sick population of Gaza, half of whom are children, to areas without running water or even toilets available, is absolutely shocking. It was and remains guaranteed to result in widespread death from viral and bacterial diarrheal diseases and pneumonias, particularly in children under the age of 5. Indeed, even the dreaded polio virus has re-emerged in Gaza due to a combination of systematic destruction of the sanitation infrastructure, widespread malnutrition weakening immune systems, and young children having missed routine vaccinations for nearly an entire year. We worry that unknown thousands have already died from the lethal combination of malnutrition and disease, and that tens of thousands more will die in the coming months, especially with the onset of the winter rains in Gaza. Most of them will be young children. Gaza was the first time I held a baby's brains in my hand, the first of many. Dr. Mark Perlmutter, or
Sorry, I was muted. This is some Trail of Tears type shit. It's so similar. Yeah.
orthopedic and hand surgeon. Children are universally considered innocents in armed conflict. However, every single signatory to this letter saw children in Gaza who suffered violence that must have been deliberately directed at them. Specifically, every one of us who worked in an emergency, intensive care, or surgical setting treated preteen children who were shot in the head or chest on a regular or even daily basis. It is impossible that such widespread shooting of young children throughout Gaza, sustained over the course of an entire year, is accidental or unknown to the highest Israeli civilian and military authorities. President Biden and Vice President
I mean, there are journalists with giant press sweaters, or not sweaters, but vests, that are getting sniped. Like the sniper bullet goes through the giant text that says press on it. And we're supposed to believe that it's not intentional. And the worst part about a lot of this is that this is a really good piece from Al Jazeera as well. This doctor in Gaza has worked almost every day since October 7th. I'm 26 years old. I graduated from the School of Medicine from the Islamic University, class of 2022. I'm currently practicing medicine at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the brain and neurology ward. Due to the number of patients that we've seen, where we never sleep, one day would start with surgeries. Okay, sorry, this text is like, the speed of the text is throwing me off. One day it would start with surgeries in the morning, and then end the very next morning with no rest or chance to even sit. For most of the war, the hospital has been home for the 26-year-old. From the beginning of the war until now, I've only really slept outside of the hospital for about 5 days. A severe lack of even basic supplies has made things even harder, as Israeli forces attacked Gaza's hospital and their health system. In the first month of the war, the hospitals began to struggle with the lack of materials needed. There's no cleaning liquids, no gowns, no gauze to clean the wounds. There's no medicine, no anesthetics. A year of dealing with patients in a non-medical way. One patient was bleeding from the skull. We looked for this small item that works like a sponge. It costs about 5 shekels, and we use it to stop the bleeding. But we had to use our thumbs to stop the bleeding because this sponge was not available in the surgery room. Later, we found it and the patient recovered. So, like, even just a small object like this can save a life. A sponge that costs 5 shekels can save a life. Dr. Salha recalls the most difficult case he faced during the war. It was in the surgery ward. A child had half of his face blasted off with some shrapnel that was in his brain. So we spent an hour in the surgery room trying to clean the side of his face and gently just removing the irretrievable parts from his eye. And the child just went into the intensive care unit, and I never knew if he made it or not. But it was one of the first cases that I saw, and the situation was very difficult, and I'm never going to forget it. Like most Palestinians in Gaza, Dr. Salha was forcibly displaced and has lost loved ones along the way. I lost many of my friends, close ones. My brother was killed in the north. It broke our hearts. We thank God despite what happens. Despite his year of struggle, Dr. Salha remains hopeful. After a year of war, thank God, we served our families in Gaza a lot. We also learned a lot, and now I have experience and skills in various surgical procedures. I just wish for us to return to our homes in the north, our demolished and burned homes. Most of Gaza's hospitals remain out of service due to Israel's war. Tens of thousands of people have life-changing injuries, and more than 41,800 people have been killed. And I mean, like, this is another example. If anyone here knows nurses or doctors or anyone who works with patients, anyone here who knows someone, or if anyone in here works in the any type of medical industry where you're working directly with patients, trying your best to help someone, and then despite all of your efforts, they pass anyways. And in a lot of these cases, especially with like invisible problems, so like even I've heard doctors and nurses talk about helping cancer patients, and even when the patients look super healthy and they look like they're recovering, and then it comes back, and then they can't fight it the second or third time. That's something that can happen to you. That's life-threatening. That can happen to you, and visibly you can look basically fine. Can you imagine working on patients that have been physically destroyed by shelling, and you try your best to just pretend like you aren't seeing a human being that's suffering to try and save them, and then you can't save them anyways? And then you got to show up tomorrow because every day that you don't show up, that's people that could have been saved that didn't get saved, right? Thanks, transhumanist. I want to go back to the letter.
President Harris, we wish you could see the nightmares that plague so many of us since we have returned. dreams of children maimed and mutilated by our weapons, and their inconsolable mothers begging us to save them. We wish you could hear the cries and screams our consciences will not let us forget. We cannot fathom why you continue arming the country that is deliberately killing these children en masse.
My sister treats cancer patients. I drive her around sometimes and she just cries. And that's working with patients who, like, they don't have any open wounds. They're physically, visibly, they look fine. To have to work on people who don't look fine, who don't look like they're going to make it, but you have to power through anyways because there's a chance that they can. Because, like, human beings are hardwired to see that and feel empathy. You're hardwired to see someone suffering, especially someone of your, like, group, and feel pain. Because we have empathy. I have a friend who's an ER nurse, and that job is so draining emotionally and physically. And that's in America. That's not even a war zone that has almost no supplies whatsoever. And she still gets to, like, go home and sleep in her own bed. Obviously, I know nurses, especially ER nurses and paramedics as well. They have, like, really insane hours. Like, a lot of them work 12-hour shifts. But even with them, at least they have medical supplies. At least they know when a patient doesn't make it, they did their best. They had everything that they could use. And it just wasn't meant to be. Like, it was out of their hands at that point. They did what they could. To know that a patient in your care doesn't make it because you don't have one tiny piece of medical supplies or supply that's like $5. Like, I can't imagine feeling that powerless and still, like, showing up to work every day. It's insane. It's insane.
So many stillbirths and maternal deaths that could have been easily prevented if the hospitals had been functioning normally. Dr. Talia Pakiyanakis, obstetrician and gynecologist. The pregnant and breastfeeding women we treated were particularly malnourished. Those of us who worked with pregnant women regularly saw stillbirths and maternal deaths that were easily preventable in any developing country's healthcare system. The rate of infection in C-section incisions was astonishing. Women underwent vaginal deliveries and even C-sections without anesthesia and were given nothing but Tylenol afterwards because no other pain medications were available. We all observed emergency departments overwhelmed by patients seeking treatment for chronic medical conditions such as renal failure, hypertension, and diabetes. Aside from trauma patients, most ICU beds were occupied by patients with type 1 diabetes who no longer had access to insulin. The lack of medication availability, the widespread loss of electricity and refrigeration, and inconsistent access to food made managing this disease impossible. Israel has destroyed more than half of Gaza's healthcare resources and has killed nearly 1,000 Palestinian healthcare workers, more than 1 out of every 20 healthcare workers in Gaza. At the same time, healthcare needs have increased massively from the lethal combination of military violence, malnutrition, disease, and displacement. The hospitals where we worked were starved of basic supplies, from surgical material to soap. They were regularly cut off from electricity and internet access, denied clean water, and operated at 4 to 7 times their bed capacity. Every hospital was overwhelmed beyond the breaking point by displaced persons seeking safety, by the constant stream of sick and malnourished patients seeking care, and by the huge influx of seriously wounded patients who typically arrived in mass casualty events. These observations and the publicly available material detailed in the appendix lead us to believe that the death toll from this conflict is many times higher than what is reported by the Gaza Ministry of Health. We also believe this is probative evidence of widespread violations of American laws governing the use of American weapons abroad and of international humanitarian law. We cannot forget scenes of unbearable cruelty directed at women and children that our government is a direct participant in. As we met our healthcare colleagues in Gaza, it was clear that they were malnourished and both physically and mentally devastated. We quickly learned that our Palestinian healthcare colleagues were among the most traumatized people in Gaza and perhaps in the entire world. Like virtually all people in Gaza, they had lost family members and their homes. Most lived in and around their hospitals with their surviving family in unimaginable conditions. Although they continued working a grueling schedule, they had not been paid since October October 7th. All were acutely aware that their work as healthcare providers had marked them as targets for Israel. This makes a mockery of the protected status hospitals and healthcare providers are granted under the oldest and most widely accepted provisions of international humanitarian law. We met healthcare personnel in Gaza who worked at hospitals that had been raided and destroyed by Israel. Many of these colleagues of ours were taken by Israel during the attacks. They all told us a slightly different version of the same story. In captivity, they were barely fed, continuously physically and psychologically abused, and finally dumped naked on the side of a road. Many told us they were subjected to mock executions and other forms of mistreatment and torture. Far too many of our healthcare colleagues told us they were simply waiting to die. The 99 signatories to this letter spent a combined 254 weeks inside Gaza's largest hospitals and clinics. We wish to be absolutely clear, not once did any of us see any type of Palestinian militant activity in any of Gaza's hospitals or other healthcare facilities. We urge you to see that Israel has systematically and deliberately devastated Gaza's entire healthcare system, and that Israel has targeted our colleagues in Gaza for torture, disappearance, and murder. President Biden and Vice President Harris, any solution to this problem must begin with an immediate and permanent ceasefire. We appreciate that you are working on a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, but you have overlooked an obvious fact. The United States can impose a ceasefire on the warring parties by simply stopping arms shipments to Israel and announcing that we will participate in an international arms embargo on both Israel and all Palestinian armed groups. We stress what many others have repeatedly told you over the past year. American law is perfectly clear on this matter. Continuing to arm Israel is illegal. President Biden and Vice President Harris, we urge you to immediately withhold military, economic, and diplomatic support from the State of Israel and to participate in an international arms embargo of Israel and all Palestinian armed groups until a permanent ceasefire is established in Gaza, including the release of all Israeli and Palestinian hostages, and until a permanent resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is negotiated between the two parties. Vice President Harris, as the likely next president of the United States, we urge you to publicly announce your support for such a policy and to state publicly that you are duty-bound to uphold the laws of the United States even when doing so is politically inconvenient. President Biden and Vice President Harris, we are 99 American physicians and nurses who have witnessed crimes beyond our comprehension, crimes that we cannot believe you wish to continue supporting. Please meet with us to discuss what we saw and why we feel American policy in the Middle East must change immediately. In the meantime, we reiterate what we wrote in our letter of July 25th, 2024. 1. The Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt must be immediately reopened and must allow unfettered aid delivery by recognized international humanitarian organizations. Security screening of aid deliveries must be conducted by an independent international inspection regime instead of by Israeli forces. These screenings must be based on a clear, unambiguous, and published list of forbidden items and with a clear, independent international mechanism for challenging forbidden items as verified by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in the occupied Palestinian territory. 2. A bare minimum water allocation of 15 liters of potable water per person per day. The Sphere Handbook minimum in a humanitarian emergency must be allocated to the population of Gaza as verified by UN Water. 3. Full and unrestricted access of medical and surgical professionals and medical and surgical equipment to the Gaza Strip must be resumed. This must include items taken in healthcare professionals' personal luggage to safeguard their proper storage, sterility, and timely delivery as verified by the World Health Organization. Incredibly, Israel continues to block healthcare workers of Palestinian descent from working in Gaza, even American citizens. This makes a mockery of the American ideal that all men are created equal and degrades both our national ideals and our profession. Our work is life-saving. Our Palestinian healthcare colleagues in Gaza are desperate for relief and protection, and they deserve both. We are not politicians. We do not claim to have all the answers. We are simply healing professionals who cannot remain silent about fuck, man. Every day that we continue supplying weapons and munitions to Israel is another day that women are shredded by our bombs and children are murdered with our bullets. President Biden and Vice President Harris, we urge you, end this madness now. Stuff like this is why I think a lot of people find it difficult to engage in domestic American political discourse, because a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for this. Whether you like it or not, whether you think Trump would be worse or not, this is what we've done. And if you have a shred of empathy, I'll leave some links in the description for fundraisers and the Gaza Healthcare Letters website, because you can email Biden or Harris directly on the website. And yeah, I don't know. That's today's video. I'll see how much footage I can show during this video. It might not be a lot, but yeah, anyways, see you in the next one. Bye.
And that is, this is exactly why I refuse on principle to tell people that they need to vote this election. Like, no. I'm going to make my decision and I'm going to vote for who I want to vote for, but I can't. I can't tell other people that they need to vote. I can't tell people who are saying, no, I refuse to vote, on the principle that America is funding this genocide. I refuse. I will not vote this election. And there are these fucking soulless pieces of shit online that will try and accuse you of trying to destroy democracy because you don't want to vote for a genocidal freak. I work in media and I've seen the worst examples of this, and the numbness of covering it has taken its toll on the team and I. We try to make people care, but the powers that don't want us to cover it, but the powers that be don't want us to cover it because it's not the top story Americans want to see. I spend most of my days on the verge of screaming. Yeah. Yeah. And there are these fucking Zionist freaks that will see this shit and say, well, they should have thought about that before they were born somewhere that Hamas exists. It's just disgusting, dude. It's just fucking disgusting. I wanted to also watch this video. It's, from my understanding, pretty good coverage, on the past year, 1 year of Israel's